A friend that I went to med school with actually got me the residency interview. My residency interview story was really odd. I don't have another word to use, but to, call it odd. I was actually at an interview at another residency position. I think it was a Friday afternoon. And he happened to talk to the secretaries who worked at the program. And last minute, they gave me an interview. So he called me, I think on Friday afternoon. I was actually in that interview and I turned my phone off. And by the time I got the messages, probably like 7 or 8 p.m., the office had closed. And he's like, you have to be here in Chicago on Monday. And I was like, okay. But somehow by hook or crook, I made it work. And I was there at the interview on Monday. And even during the interview process, the first thing they told us is that we prefer green card holders. So as soon as they told me that, I just relaxed and I thought to myself, I'm going to have a good time. And I was confident, laughing and, just still trying to be the best I could in terms of, presenting myself well and, presenting what I had to offer to the program, despite thinking at the back of my head, they're not going to take me anyways. But I think me being relaxed and, really being able to articulate what I had to offer helped me.
The IMG Roadmap is the only podcast dedicated to coaching international medical graduates in success blueprints for this unique pathway. I am Dr. Nina Loom, your host, a previous IMG turned hospital medicine physician, healthcare administrator, speaker, and coach. I empower, encourage, and equip you with actionable steps that you can take towards the residency position of your dreams. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the IMG Roadmap podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Anita Lwanga. I'm so excited to be reunited with her through Zoom. We've been communicating by email, trying to set this date up. And I'm so glad she reached out to me because I'm sure you're going to learn something from her story. Dr. Anita, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Dr. Nina. Thank you so much for inviting me and allowing me to be a guest on your podcast.
I'm delighted to have you. So tell the people, where are you calling from today?
I'm calling from Western Canada. I actually grew up in Canada. I did my training before I went to med school in Western Canada. And thereafter, I got into medical school at St. Matthew's University, which is in Cayman Islands. And thereafter, I matched into residency in Chicago. I did my general internal medicine training at Mount Sinai Hospital on the west side of Chicago. And after that, I did a fellowship in geriatrics at University of Illinois. Thereafter, I started working in upstate New York. I worked there for about 3.5 years. And more recently, I moved back to Canada to start working as a general internist. In terms of the way internal medicine is practiced in the US and Canada, there are a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences. In the US, I think internists tend to focus on either doing inpatient work or outpatient work. When I was working in upstate New York, I was working primarily as a hospitalist, so I worked primarily in the hospital, and I hadn't been doing a lot of outpatient work for the last 3.5 years. Now that I'm back in Canada, internists tend to do both inpatient and outpatient, and the way they practice is similar to, the traditional model of what an internist is. They see their patients in clinic and they also see them in hospital. So right now I see patients both in the hospital, I see them in my own clinic, and we also have a local, what we call pre-admission clinic, which gets patients ready for surgery. So we work with anesthesiologists and we evaluate patients before surgery. So it's been quite a transition, but it's been good. It's been good.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. So just so the, our audience is keeping up with you, you are a Canadian citizen and went to medical school in the Caribbean. So that's how you became an IMG, by leaving Canada to go to the Caribbean for medical school. But then you completed your residency training in the United States and also did a fellowship. Isn't that right?
Yes. And I also did a fellowship. You are absolutely right. I am a Canadian citizen and also did my training outside of the US. So I'm definitely like a non-US IMG.
Right, absolutely. And I think a lot of people listening today are in that same position, whether they're US IMGs or non-US IMGs or Canadians that are taking this pathway, because as we were talking beforehand, you said there are fewer medical schools in Canada for the number of people who want to go into medicine. And so that usually results in this sort of exportation of medical students. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, there are, I would say, fewer universities in Canada to begin with, and then fewer med schools. And we do not have DO schools as well. So a lot of Canadians end up going either to the Caribbean or Europe to do their medical school training. I think I read a report maybe like 5, 10 years ago that said if you look at all the medical graduates in Canada, half of them have actually trained outside of Canada. So it's it can be a bit discouraging depending on how you look at it. But I think one thing that you have to be an IMG is you have to be a little bit bold and be confident in yourself. I think that there are different, well, not to say the different kinds of IMGs, but I think having that understanding that you're trying to get into residency in a country that does not necessarily see you as one of theirs, you really have to have a lot of confidence in yourself and a lot of confidence in what you have to offer. And I think that's one thing I'd definitely like to communicate, to everyone who's listening, the importance of, being confident in yourself and knowing what you have to offer and how to communicate that to others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Now, can you tell me obviously before we started recording, we were just talking about your origins and a little bit about your personal background. Can you tell us a little bit more about where your family's from and what was that push for you to train in the United States in internal medicine and geriatrics?
So my family's actually from East Africa. So I was born in Kenya. My parents were actually not from Kenya. They left as refugees from Uganda because there's civil war. So the challenging situation with regards to us being in Kenya is that we were considered refugees. We didn't have citizenship. So at some point in time, my parents eventually got the opportunity to immigrate to Canada. So I think there's actually 6 kids in my family. So I grew up in a big family. And my father was a physician. His journey in terms of working in Canada was also fairly challenging. Despite completing a pediatrics residency in Kenya, he had to retrain. He was fortunate enough to get an internal medicine position in Canada. So we watched him go through the process of being an IMG in Canada. And that surprisingly did not deter me from my journey of becoming a physician. From a young age, I knew I wanted to be a physician. And throughout high school, I tried to be fairly focused. I did my first undergraduate degree at University of Calgary in exercise and health physiology. And unfortunately, I was not the strongest student. And as I said, there's not a lot of medical schools. So you have to be exceptionally sharp and bright and on top of things. And even then, a lot of people did not necessarily get into medical school in Canada on the first try. A lot of people have masters or even a PhD in addition to their first degree. But rather than going that route, I chose to go to St. Matthews in Cayman Islands. So I guess, my journey to becoming a physician was definitely influenced by my father.
Thanks for sharing that. I definitely understand how you feel. I have a parent, my mother is a physician as well. And it's just something you can't explain. You can't put in words when you grow up seeing somebody being, or just living their life, right? They're just doing their day to day. And it ends up imprinting a lot more on you and how you end up living your own life without even thinking about it. And I think that's such a blessing because in many ways we had early direction, which some people don't have. And so let's talk about direction for a little bit. What are your recommendations or your advice for others who are in a similar position and maybe don't have a parent that is a physician and they're, on this pathway as a non-US IMG seeking internal medicine residency? What are the key tenets that you think they need to incorporate in their life in order to sort of replicate the results that you've achieved?
I think the 2 key messages I would want people to know is the importance of networking and getting to know people. And also, as I alluded to before, being confident in what you have to offer. So going back to networking, looking back at my story with regards to the med school I chose a med school that I had family friends that had attended that school. So I knew a little bit about the school. And with regards to residency, a friend that I went to med school with actually got me the residency interview. My residency interview story was really odd. I don't have another word to use, but to call it odd. I was actually at an interview at another residency position. I think it was a Friday afternoon. And he happened to talk to the secretaries who worked at the program. And last minute, they gave me an interview. So he called me, I think on Friday afternoon. I was actually in that interview and I turned my phone off. And by the time I got the messages, probably like 7 or 8 p.m., the office had closed. And he's like, you have to be here in Chicago on Monday. And I was like, okay. But somehow by hook or crook, I made it work. And I was there at the interview on Monday. And even during the interview process, the first thing they told us is that we prefer green card holders. So as soon as they told me that, I just relaxed and I thought to myself, I'm going to have a good time. And I was confident, laughing, and, just still trying to be the best I could in terms of, presenting myself well and, presenting what I had to offer to the program, despite thinking at the back of my head, they're not going to take me anyways. But I think me being relaxed and, really being able to articulate what I had to offer helped me get that position, because in the end, it was a pre-match. So they offered me the position on the spot. So going back to networking, that position that I matched in, several people that went to my med school had already matched there. So the program kind of knew what kind of candidate they're going to get. If you think about programs, they're trying to pick somebody that's a known element, somebody that's not going to, necessarily give them a hard time. Like, they want to like your personality, but they also want to know a little bit about your training, what kind of med school you've been to. And in terms of letters of recommendation, if it's a letter of recommendation from somebody that they know, then they're more likely to take you. So I think that was a similar pattern in my program. I think a lot of the previous residents had done internal medicine rotations as students with the same physicians that I had worked with. So probably they had seen letters of recommendation from that same physician or same group of physicians. So that really helped. And then going back to being confident in what you have to offer, I think it's so easy to compare ourselves to other IMGs and say, oh, this person has this person has accomplished this or done that. But I think it's really important to focus on yourself and not worry about what other people are doing or what other people are offering. All of us are unique and all of us have something to offer. So from my point of view, I did not match, to be honest. We can talk a little bit more about that later on. But I did not match the first time around when I applied. I had applied too late. But the second time around, I think I knew myself better and I knew what I had to offer. And in that year that I had not had time to match, I actually went back and completed a second degree that I'd been working on prior to getting into med school. And I started working on a couple of research projects. So I knew not a lot of people are, that interested in research. And during my application process in my CV, I emphasized that and I talked about that in my letter of intent. And again, at the interview, I knew programs want people who have done research, because at the end of the day, again, if you look at what a program wants, they want somebody who's going to make them look good. And one of the things that ACGME requires is students or residents have scholarly activity and research projects. So I emphasized that during my interview as well. And I told them, there's this project I'm working on. I'd like to continue working on it during residency, and actually completed it during residency. So having a resident who is doing research projects, it makes the program look good. So it doesn't have to be research. It could be something else. Say if you have a great social media following. There's a lady on Instagram called Surgery and the City. And I think she started that before she actually matched. So if you have something like that, that makes you unique. Her representing herself and, just being herself makes her program look good, because people are going to look at her and then they're going to Google, oh, what program is she in? Oh, that program is really interesting, So you don't have to necessarily have those two things, but just look at yourself, see what you have to offer, be confident in it, and, just be confident in yourself.
Right. I agree 100%. I think there is this, first of all, let's just break down. You said a lot of things that I want us to just recapture. There's this one idea that when you fail the first time, you're automatically doomed, right? A lot of people go through that where they don't get in on the first attempt and it gets to define their life forever. I know people who've given up after 2 attempts even and said, hey, this is not for me. I need to move on. And I know people who've gotten on the 4th attempt. So I would like us to come back to that a little bit more. But I think one thing that you mentioned, which a lot of what I do also is talking about things that we're doing that we don't realize could also affect our results, was you were very open and introspective in how that occurred. And speaking about applying late. And that's something that I don't think some IMGs even recognize, that it's possible to apply late enough to influence or impact your outcome. So I want us to come back to that as well. And then I also want us to come back to just speaking a little bit more about that scholarly activity and research, and then even those extracurriculars, like having other sides to you, which are not driven by just, academics. For example, I know right now you have your own passions that you're pursuing, and we'll get into that as well. But let's start off. right now, just kind of digging into that part of not getting in on the first attempt. What did that do for you and how did that make you feel? And then how did you overcome it?
So I think I completed my UAssembly exams late. So by the time I applied, it must have been October. And I think one lesson I learned from that is the importance of being timely. And I think everyone right now is really about, applying as soon as the window opens, submitting right away. So that is one big lesson I learned, the importance of having a plan in advance and being timely. So in terms of that first cycle, I did not even get one interview. I think I applied to probably every program I could find that accepted IMGs and non-US citizens and not one interview. It was really discouraging, but at the same time, I was really fortunate enough to have lots of support from my friends and my family, which really helped me just keep focused and pivot. So as soon as I finished medical school, I thought to myself, okay, if I'm going to reapply, but I know I need to do something to make me more competitive. I know these programs are going to, if I get an interview, ask me, what have you done with your time off? So I went back to complete the degree or a degree I'd been doing prior to getting into med school. Not everyone might be in that position, but if you suspect things are not going to go as planned, I think it's important to also have a backup plan in terms of, say, applying for another degree. I would have been too late to actually start the cycle for another degree, such as a master's, but if you have a feeling that that's going to happen, I think that's a good thing to have. And I think it's important to be strategic. If you are able to apply for another degree at the same time you're applying for a match, think about a degree that is going to give you additional things that you can bring to the program. For example, a degree where you're going to do research projects or where you're going to produce something tangible. So for me, having that focus in that I have to complete these activities, I have to complete these courses, that took my mind off of being discouraged that I didn't match. Of course, I was discouraged. Of course, it was depressing at times, but keeping yourself busy and, working towards achieving something and achieving different goals is really important. And I think also trying to achieve something you're passionate about so that, when you go to your interviews, you can talk about it with passion. I think that's one thing program directors look at. They know people try to tick things off. I did this, I did that. But if you can pick activities that you're also passionate about, I think that is something that, makes you more competitive and also makes you naturally confident as well.
I agree 100% with that, 100%. So let's talk about the second thing, which was the late application. What do you consider a late application and how do you recommend IMGs avoid that?
A late application, to be honest, I think if possible, if you can have your letters of recommendation, all your step scores, your letter from your medical school, your CV, everything, even any research project, there before the window where you're open to apply, I think it's ideal to have them there the day before. A late application, I think, is any day after the window has opened. In my case, mine was very late, which was October, but I think, being organized as much as possible is very important. So I would say day one, the day you can apply, try have everything ready.
And by everything ready, are you saying, what if I don't have my LORs ready or I'm still waiting on my dean to submit my MSPE? Are you saying ready as far as scores or tell us more?
Yes, I mean, ready as far as scores and ready as far as the letters of recommendation from your dean and from even other physicians that are giving you letters of recommendation. Of course, some of these things are out of our control. If, say, the day it's time to apply, somebody else has not submitted things on time for you, give them a call. Don't be shy. Physicians, of course, are busy. And oftentimes when you become an attending, you're so busy, you can become absent-minded. So I think it's important to, talk to them in advance and, even a couple of weeks before, look and see if they've uploaded stuff. If they haven't, give them a reminder call, a reminder email. That is very helpful. But if things are a few days late, it's not the end of the world. But in an ideal world, having things ready on the day that you can submit is ideal. If you actually look at some of the forums, I think there's a forum called Student Doctor Network Forum. I'm not sure if a lot of American students are still there, but that's a great place to get a lot of information. If you see what American students are doing, it's good to kind of copy them. So I'd go stalk those forums and I'd see a lot of people saying, at least in that gap year, I'd see a lot of people saying, oh, day one, I'm going to submit quick and everything is going to be there. So I was like, oh man, I have to be there. So on day one, I think as soon as we were able to submit, I was sitting at my computer. Probably I wasn't able to submit right away because all the programs were getting inundated with applications. But that's one thing you also have to remember. These programs on day one, as soon as the cycle opens, are going to get a ton of applications. If you can get yours in there right away, it might not, completely make a difference, but it makes a difference in terms of making sure you're one of the first ones there. Some of the programs might have a cutoff and that after day one or day two, they're not going to accept any more applications because they get hundreds of applications per spot. So that's why I think it's really important to be timely.
I agree 100%. And I tell my students this all the time because I also have a online school where we teach IMGs how to prepare for residency applications. And this is something we discuss, especially around July, August, when everyone is sort of ramping up and people are still waiting. They're waiting till August before they start writing that personal statement, or waiting till August until they feel like, oh, I should really do this. And they're still asking, should I even do it? Sometimes in the summer, I'm like, you should already know that you're going to apply in September so that when the date comes for programs to start downloading, your application is full, ready to go. Because there's just so many other people fighting for that one spot that you're not going to show up to the race without your running shoes. You're not going to show up to the race like 5 minutes after everyone already, started taking off their, for the race. How do you expect that that's not going to apply for the most important, highly competitive, highly esteemed career pathway as medicine? Like, it just doesn't make any sense, right? And so I strongly, strongly recommend anyone listening to this, if you're going to take action, do it and do it well and be ready from day one. Thank you so much for shedding light on that, Dr. Anita. So let's sort of shift gears a little bit and speak about your current day-to-day life. I mean, after going through this hustle, not getting into residency the first time, filling up that time with scholarly activity and research, and then reapplying, and then going to interview at a program that told you, well, we only take green card holders, but then you sat through that and you're like, well, even if already rejected from the front, I'm still going to give them my best, put my best foot forward. And you end up matching and you end up now in clinical practice. Actually, while we're talking about that, before we even get into your day-to-day, there's something that I want you to just touch on a little bit, which is, how did that feel in that moment? Because I would imagine if someone was telling me, I only accept green card holders, the average IMG would shrink and would probably feel like all is lost. Why even try, right? But you took a different approach and you were like, well, I'm already here and I'm going to make the best out of it. And in some form or fashion, you ended up converting them, from my understanding. So what was that mindset shift and what happened?
I think the way I took it is that even if they're, rejecting me up front before anything starts, I'm going to use this opportunity to practice. I had prepared for my interviews extensively. I actually bought a book about preparing for interviews. And I was like, okay, I'll use this as an experience to practice. And beyond that, I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to get to know these people. The people who were interviewing us seemed fairly friendly. And I knew some of the residents, though I didn't get to talk to them directly. But I still made sure to do everything that I would have done at another program, such as approaching residents when they do not have their attending or other people around them and asking them, what do they really think about the program? So if you find yourself in that position, still be confident in yourself, still focus on presenting yourself the best way you can, and, just make the most of that opportunity, because you never know what's going to happen on the other side. So that's the best advice I'd give them. Use it as a practice opportunity, and more importantly, also relax and be yourself. I think we spend so much time and effort preparing, for the whole process. Like, we go through so much with med school, go through so much with applications. And by the time we show up at an interview, we're so anxious. I think that was definitely a blessing in disguise, because I took the pressure off of myself and I was just myself. And I think that made a difference in them getting to see who I really am.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. So now let's come back into your current day-to-day life and what you're doing right now. Can you share with us, some of your passions and how you're incorporating medicine with them?
So even before med school, I studied exercise and health physiology, and I chose that pathway because I used to be a competitive gymnast. So one of my passions is fitness and exercise. To be honest, I haven't been as good as I should be about exercising, but I think if I had a philosophy, I would say exercise is the best medicine. Once you go into clinical practice, you will see that there are a lot of different conditions that are lifestyle induced, unfortunately. And some of the medications we give are not necessarily fixing or reversing whatever's going on in the person's body. They're just acting as a bridge to kind of hold things over. So with regards to my passion with exercise and lifestyle medicine, anytime I have time to talk to my patients about their lifestyle, I try to encourage them to exercise. I try to encourage them to choose foods that are more natural and more towards their natural form. And I try to incorporate that into my day-to-day life. So on an ideal day, I would exercise before I go to work. It definitely gives me a lot more energy. And anytime I can encourage other people to exercise, I do that. And in terms of choosing healthy foods, life is so busy, especially as a medical student and as a resident, you don't necessarily have time to pick the most healthy foods. But one tip I could give people in terms of selecting foods that are more natural is look at whatever you're going to select. If it's closer to its natural form, I heard a saying, I can't remember exactly who said this, but they say pick foods that fly, that walk, that swim, and that grow that way. So that makes things a little bit simpler. If you're at a gas station and you see a banana versus a bag of chips, pick the banana or pick the almonds, pick things that are in their natural form. And I think that is definitely one thing I'm passionate about. Other than that, I'm looking forward to, once my new practice gets more settled down, spending more time with my friends and my family.
So that means you have a new practice. And where is that located? And what is the vision for the practice? Because obviously everyone listening, including myself as the host of the podcast, we're all IMGs. And the reason we're going into residency is because we have this dream, we have a vision, we have plans and goals. And some of us, like you said, I share with you in that goal is spending more time with my family. But in order to do that, there has to be a certain level of financial security. There has to be a certain level of personal achievement, gratification with my work. And so we gain that by going to training and then leaving training and practicing in a field that makes us happy and the field that helps us impact society and life as a whole. So I like to hear about your vision, your goals, because that helps people see that this is possible, not only in regards to the right now, which is passing a step 1 exam or step 2 exam, but in the long run, why do we do what we do? So share with us your vision and where you see this going.
So my vision, ideally, once everything is settled, is to have a practice where I have more time to, definitely with the clinical part, spend with my patients. I think the challenge in being employed by a company, it's great to be employed, but you are basically trying to fulfill their agenda and trying to make what they want happen. And in the case of most companies, they want you to see as many patients as possible, as quickly as possible, but at the same time, practice evidence-based medicine. I think one of the beauties of being self-employed is that you can make your practice whatever you want it to be. So my ideal practice would be one where I see patients and I spend more time with them, more than if they need an hour, I can spend an hour with them. And ideally, in addition to talking about the, general medical things, I'd like to incorporate more lifestyle-based medicine. And that takes time. It takes time to talk to people about diet. It takes time to talk to people about exercise. But that would be my ideal practice. I definitely still want to do both inpatient and outpatient. I think there's a lot of joy in doing a little bit of both and practicing in different spaces. It keeps you on your toes and it keeps you from getting bored. So my ideal practice would be one where I have more control over my hours. Right now, of course, I have a new practice, so I have to spend a little bit more time building things up. But in the future, I would spend maybe 1 week in the hospital, or maybe 1 or 2 weeks in the clinic, and then also have 1 or 2 weeks off to also focus on other aspects of my life as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that and giving us something to look forward to, because there's other people that will probably realize that, hey, lifestyle practice or lifestyle medicine in private practice is an option while still maintaining that traditional inpatient, outpatient route and not giving up on your inpatient skills. So I really appreciate that you brought us through that. Now, some final words of wisdom as we round up the episode. What are your top 3, would you say, mantras or recommendations for others that are looking up to you in trying to attain the level of success that you now experience?
I think point number 1 would be to network. By network, in addition to talking to your, people who went to your med school and matched at your ideal program, don't be afraid to get help. For example, Dr. Nina has a school for IMGs, and she has so many words of wisdom. So reach out to her, reach out to other people like her who've gone ahead of you, who have advice, because every nugget that somebody gives you could totally change your trajectory. So that would be point number 1. Point number 2 is be confident in what you have to offer and figure out a way to articulate that. And I know one of the things that is quite different about American culture for me, even from comparing Canadian and American culture, is this way of, promoting yourself and sharing what you have done. Don't be shy to share what you have done. In other cultures, for sure, I know like East African culture, people will be like, oh, you're bragging too much, you're talking too much about yourself, or you're too confident in the way you present yourself. Don't worry about that. Think about the programs that you're going to apply to and know that they have people who are knocking at their doors, who are very bold and who are confident in what they have to offer. So be confident in what you have to offer, even if it's not what you'd think is ideal or perfect. Be confident in what you have to offer. And the last thing I'd say would be to follow your gut. If something does not feel right to you, say, for example, you interview at a position and you're, even though it's what seems like the only opportunity, if your gut is telling you something is wrong, it takes some time to listen to that, reflect, definitely get advice, get other people's input, because it might just be, a bad day, you're a little bit off. But if you talk to other people, they might say, oh, yeah, XYZ is going on. I think that'll be the last thing I have to say. Follow your gut.
Follow your gut. I love it. There is something to be said about instinct. And when you feel it, sometimes you got to lean in and investigate. I use that myself as a self-coaching mechanism, where when I feel something deep within me, I lean in and ask more questions. So sometimes you just have to keep asking yourself questions in your thoughts, in your words, in the way that you speak to yourself, and really the answer will come. So thank you so much for being on the show with us today, Dr. Lwanga. Now, after such an impactful episode, IMGs and our listeners are going to want to connect with you. How and where on these social interwebs can we find you?
Well, on LinkedIn, I can be found as Anita Lwanga. The spelling of my last name is Lwanga. And I have to say, Dr. Nina, you are killing it in the pronunciation of my last name. You are doing a great job. And in terms of Instagram, I can be found at Lwanga MD. That's Lwanga MD, all in lowercase. On Twitter, I can be found as at Lwanga MD. Lwanga is capitalized and MD is capitalized. And on TikTok, I am Dr. Lwanga, all lowercase, DrLwanga. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I am open. Probably IG would be the best place to find me. I'm probably there more frequently, but I'm willing to share any advice I have. And I wish you all the best on your journeys.
Absolutely, 100%. Thanks for giving us those handles. We'll have them down in the show notes, guys, so you will be able to one-click and connect with her. I wanted to just say, as a sub-Saharan African myself, my last name gets butchered every single day. So I know how you feel. And I'm sure our fellow Indian, Pakistani, Middle Eastern counterparts feel the same. But trust me, after listening to the way people pronounce my last name, I'm just like, okay, fine, whatever. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners are saying, they're nodding their heads right now, like, yep, my last name is always butchered in the hospital or doing rotations and such. So trust, I know that feeling. And sometimes we're guilty of it too. we read the Russian name incorrectly sometimes. So, hey, whatever it is, just try to learn people's last names. I think it's such a compliment. Makes people happy, right? When you do that, especially when you're networking. If you're going to be networking with someone, you better get their name right, because that's going to grab their attention immediately. So thanks for coming on. And guys, go check Dr. Lwanga out. All her links are down below. It's my pleasure to interview such a successful physician who has come back, more importantly, to share her story so you can learn from it. And if you're curious about my online school, you can find that at imgroadmap.com. We have also a free webinar for you on how to be a competitive applicant, even if you don't have a 250 score on the USMLE. So that link will be down below in the show notes as well. Click and join us in class. Thank you.